It's on Big X the Plug.
I bet all that and more is coming your way in how long, Papa Ron?
5 minutes.
Right here on your 97.9 The Beat. We getting toxic, baby.
Hold up.
What's happening? It's the biggest boss in the biz, Ricky Rose. And let me remind you what went down for the 97 days of summer. We gave you concerts.
I like 97.9 because they be giving away concert tickets.
Post Malone, Bryson Tiller, Eric Badu.
Interestingly enough, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, who's also an Auburn grad, she's the head basically of all the school boards and all the university campuses there, being governor of Alabama. That's how they structure their laws there. And she wrote the FFRF letter telling them pretty much everything except War Eagle. And, move on. She said, regardless of whether you're on Auburn campus or some other place in Alabama, you have the right to exercise your faith.
Yeah.
Get over it. People in Wisconsin, let's move on. So that's been a positive case there. And we'll see whether or not maybe other coaches do the same as Freeze did in recent weeks.
I mean, it'd be one thing if they were grabbing people walking by and dragging them into the lane.
Yes.
That would be wrong.
That is wrong. But they, of their own accord, held a baptism service together.
Yeah.
But to me, it is always something I think, like people who are anti-religion, that's their belief system, and they're allowed to have that.
Absolutely.
But nobody else is allowed to have their belief system.
Yeah. Well, and too, like this insistence on, this employee of the school can't practice his religion, when he's on campus or whatever they're wanting. I would wonder, like, okay, so, and this might be showing my ignorance again of other belief systems, but in Islam, Muslims are required to pray a certain number of times a day. They have to face a certain direction and all this. So if he had been Muslim, it was like, 3 o'clock or whatever. Again, I'm ignorant as to this fact, but 3 o'clock, it's time to do this. And if he did it, like, would that still have faced the amount of ire from this organization? Probably. I mean, they're against all religion. They're not just against Christianity. Right. But again, like, we live in a country, where we have freedom of religion, freedom of expression. We should embrace these things and really defend these things. And I'm glad that this is happening. We are facing these questions and forced to answer them.
It's funny that you both mentioned the fact that you can't force people into baptism, because that would be wrong. Attorney Jeremy Dice was on Today's Issues earlier this week talking with us about this very issue. And Jeremy said, quote, "The Supreme Court says that if you think there has been a violation of the Establishment Clause, you have to bring hard evidence that there has been some sort of actual coercion taking place, meaning somebody grabbed somebody by like the scruff of the neck and forced them into the waters of baptism. If you can't prove that, then you need to move on, because this other clause, called the Free Exercise Clause, protects the right of people of faith to do people of faith things in this country."
Exactly. Well, we only have like 3 minutes left. Do we want to briefly go over another story?
I can. I think we need to continue to pray, not only for our leaders, but also for the people wanting to be leaders of this country. The Bible tells us to pray for our leaders, and certainly I think we should, read into that by also praying that we would get the leaders that we need, not the leaders we deserve. I think sometimes you get, hey, you people who've been acting fools, here's somebody to lead you, further astray, that kind of thing. So I think we should pray not only for our leaders. There's been a lot of division lately, certainly in the House. Republicans are pretty much fighting in public over the speakership. Certainly, you can find out more about that on afn.net if you don't know what I'm talking about. Kevin McCarthy was ousted as House Speaker, and so now they're going to be voting on somebody else who might bravely take up that position. Maybe walking on eggshells, wondering if he or she is next to be ousted. But we have a lot of division in the House. Certainly Democrats and Republicans don't get along. And then we all know the stories involving the umpteen Republicans wanting to be president. That fight appears far from over, and there is another debate coming up in a few weeks. I'll be here, Lord willing, covering that for us. But in the meantime, let's all pray.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pray for all of them. Pray for both, the Democrats, Libertarian, whoever. Pray for all of them, and pray that the ones who you don't agree with, because maybe they are unbiblical in their stances, pray for their eyes to be open. Because, the only difference between us and them is that we have been redeemed by Christ. Because we were, and if it weren't for that, we could very well be of the same mindset that they are.
Yeah, when Paul commanded the church to pray for their leaders, he was commanding them under the rule of Nero. So he was telling them, hey, practical stuff, and I think something that we really, really need to hear. So thanks so much, Chris, for being on with us. It's always a pleasure. Again, guys, we want to remind you real quick, next week is Sheriff-on. This is our biannual, is that the right word for it? It's twice a year, biannual fundraiser. You have a chance to partner with us and join us in our mission to support and encourage Christians, as well as build our culture in a way that we hope pleases God. So thank you in advance for doing that. You can go to afr.net. It's the easiest and most efficient way to join us in that. But you can also call us next week. So stay tuned on AFR for all of those details. And until next episode, guys, keep sharing truth and applying scripture.
KTXG Greenville, Dallas.
Camera speed.
Action.
American Family Studios is made up of a team of producers, directors, and writers.
Austin Brooks, director of American Family Studios.
The heart of what we do at American Family Studios is to support and affirm the mission of American Family Association.
American Family Studios products are available at afastore.net. Of our nation's capital, this is Washington Watch Weekend Edition. Now, here's your host, David Salkeld. This week on the Weekend Edition of Washington Watch, the House is once again without a leader, Biden's no new taxes moment, and answers to the new trans movement. Greetings, fellow patriots. I am David Salkeld, and I'm a constitutional conservative, Christian husband, and Reagan Republican. After months of inaction and only recent movement on things that should have been started long ago, the House passed a motion this week to vacate the chair, which means Kevin McCarthy is no longer the Speaker of the House. Joining Tony Perkins on Thursday to discuss the path forward was Dr. Andy Harris, who represents the 1st Congressional District of Maryland. Here's Tony Perkins.
Dr. Harris, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to see you. Good to be with you, Tony. Well, I've had conversations with a number of your colleagues as they are huddling, trying to discuss next steps. What's the latest that you can tell us?
Well, look, I think we're going to resolve this next week. We have a deep bench. That's what we found out because when former Speaker McCarthy said he's not going to run for it again, several very good individuals stepped forward. Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise, Tom Emmer's probably in the mix. Other folks as well. And I think we're going to come to a decision next week, and then we're going to move forward.
In the meantime, can the Appropriations Committee do any additional work, or are we at a standstill?
Well, the committee itself could do work, but it's unclear whether we could bring a product to the floor. That's really where we stopped. We had passed a rule to bring 2 of the bills to the floor this week. And that's when we moved and successfully vacated the speakership. But it's unclear whether the Speaker pro tem, who is Patrick McHenry from North Carolina, whether he has the ability to allow any floor action other than the election of the Speaker at this point. So I think we're in a standstill until after the Columbus Day holiday. We're going to come back. Hopefully on Wednesday we elect a new Speaker and we go right into taking up those appropriations bills and get the last 7 done in the House.
How much time is going to be required to get those remaining 7 funding bills through the process? Because this was a big sticking point. I mean, this is the omnibus, the mini buses that we've seen before, where all these have been lumped together. That was the big issue and the concern among yourself and other conservatives. So is there going to be time, and how much time will it take to get that done?
Well, we had it mapped out, again, before the motion to vacate, we had it mapped out so that by November 1st, we would have had all the bills on the floor, not necessarily have passed all the bills. Some will not pass. That's okay. The legislative processes, we should discuss them on the floor. This will set us back a week and a half, 2 weeks, so we still could have them all done by the time the continuing resolution is up on November 17th. We probably have to cancel a week of recess in November. I think we should at that point if that's what we need to do. But Tony, we could have it done by the end of the continuing resolution. Hopefully the Senate also takes some of these up on the floor. Senate hasn't taken a single one up on the floor yet. Hopefully they begin their floor action as well.
Well, Senator Rick Scott of Florida is leading an effort over in the Senate to block bills not related to government funding, because you see almost every day when the Senate is in session, Chuck Schumer kind of taunting the Republicans in the House about government funding, but they've done nothing over there in terms of advancing their appropriations bills.
That's absolutely correct. 4 bills on the floor. Those 4 bills account for about 70% of our discretionary spending. The Senate has taken up no bills on the floor, so we're actually way ahead of the Senate. Again, if the Senate would move on a defense appropriation bill, I think we could go to conference pretty quickly and at least take care of our troops so that they're not involved in a continuing resolution if we should need one in the middle of November.
So, Congressman Harris, your colleagues kind of understand that the Democrats are just kind of standing there, I think, salivating, hoping the Republicans can't come together so that they can just continue to proliferate government spending. Because if the Republicans can't get leadership together to move forward these appropriations bills, we're going to see another continuation, probably a year-long funding of government.
Well, if we do go to a year-long funding of government, because of the debt ceiling deal, it will be at 1% less spending than this year. So, government spending will get a haircut, not a big one, but considering that inflation is present, it's a significant spending decrease, 1%. I think we should decrease our spending more than that. We should return to pre-COVID spending levels. But again, worst comes to worst, we will, by law, be spending less this coming fiscal year or this fiscal year we're in right now than the last fiscal year.
Well, I'm with you. I hope that Republicans can come together next week and select a leader to move forward and get these appropriations bills forward, because I think the Republicans are on the right track. I understand narrow margins and trying to lead the Republicans through makes it very difficult for leadership, but we're moving in the right direction, so we just need to continue to pray that occurs. I want to get your response, Congressman Harris, to President Biden yesterday, once again, even though he's been slapped down by the court before, is saying he's going to find another way to eliminate student loan debt with taxpayer dollars.
Look, I just don't get it. I guess I understand the politics of it, Tony. But look, I have small business people in my district. They run a plumbing company, they run an HVAC company. They have a truck loan. They have to borrow money to buy a truck. Why aren't we forgiving those loans? I mean, the bottom line is, a student loan was taken out by someone who signed their name and said they were going to pay it back. There are mortgage loans, there are credit card loans, there are other loans where people do the same thing. Why are we picking student loans to be the one that's forgiven with taxpayer dollars? And that's significant because when we just ended a fiscal year with $2.2 trillion deficit, $2.2 trillion, and we're going to give away money to people who have signed something that said they're going to pay their loan back, and we expect 90% of taxpayers to pay for those 10% who are not going to pay their student loans back. It's just basically unfair.
I want to get you to respond to something the president said along those lines yesterday, where he actually compared the student loan to the PPP plan during the COVID. I want to play clip number 4 and get you to respond to this.
Let's be clear. Some of the same elected Republicans or members of Congress who were strongly opposed to getting relief to students got hundreds of thousands of dollars in relief for themselves to keep their businesses open. Several members of Congress got over $1 million, and all those loans were forgiven. The hypocrisy of this I find stunning.
Congressman, how do you respond to that?
Look, it's apples and oranges. The bottom line is that the federal government forced businesses to close. Students were at school. They took out these loans. These loans had nothing to do with COVID. The president is making up excuses for a purely political purpose. Look, he reads the polls. He's down in the polls. He's desperate. He has to get people to vote for him, and he's attempting to buy votes with taxpayer dollars.
But I want to go a little further, because if I recall correctly, and you're closer to the process, but when the pay protection plan came out, there was, it was communicated that you wouldn't pay back these loans. This was more than a loan as long as you kept the employees in place. This was about taking care of the employees who were going to be paid during these business shutdowns. So it is apples and oranges. It is a big difference between the two.
Absolutely, Tony. There's no question about it. This president wants to forgive student loans that are 10 years old, that predated COVID by 7 or 8 years. It has nothing to do with COVID. It's mixing apples and oranges. This is purely for political purposes. Look, I get it. He wants to buy the votes of the people who have student loans. He shouldn't do it with taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers should resent that. Even if you have a loan, you should resent it, because who knows what he's going to spend your money on next week.
Right.
With a $2.2 trillion deficit. $2.2 trillion, Tony, that's completely unprecedented when we're not at war and we're not in a pandemic.
And that's all the while he's running around claiming that he has reduced the deficit, largest deficit reduction in history. Congressman Andy Harris, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Congressman Andy Harris, Dr. Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland. You know, it's also interesting that this is the second time around coming into an election where the president has promised these student loan bailouts. You know, you get 2 bites of the apple. He's actually buying votes twice with the same lie. Hopefully students, these folks that have college degrees now, will be wiser than that. All right, don't go away. We're coming back with more Washington Watch on the other side of the break.
Persecution of Christians grows globally every year and continues to become more aggressive and dangerous. Family Research Council's Leila Gilbert, Ariel Del Turco, and Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin's book, Heroic Faith, shares the true stories from those who have faced religious persecution and takes a look at the heartbreaking circumstances Christians encounter due to the difficult and sometimes deadly hostility to their faith. Get your copy wherever books are sold or at frc.org/heroicfaith.
This is Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host, and once again, the website, tonyperkins.com. All right, according to an announcement released yesterday from Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, the United States has an acute and immediate need to build a wall on the southern border. In response to this need, Secretary Mayorkas issued an order waiving some of the left's most cherished environmental protection laws to speed up border wall construction. Now, I welcome this, quite frankly, but this contradicts everything the Biden administration has insisted since they took over. Is the White House responding to the polling, to the political pressure? Is it the criticism from Democratic mayors and governors that led to this U-turn? And with as many as 9 million illegal immigrants who have already entered the country since President Biden took office, is it too little too late? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Congressman Pete Sessions. He serves on the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability and the House Financial Services Committee. He represents the 17th Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Sessions, welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Tony, thank you very much. What an amazing set of circumstances now that we find the Biden administration and Democrats in it. I'm reminded of from going back easily with Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and now they want to be firefighters, but what they turn out to be is arsonists. By the way, they started then try and take credit for what they do to be firefighters. They caused the problem. It is a problem. It's a huge problem for not just the state of Texas, but New York, California, and so many places. And now that they've got the mayor of New York City paying $10 million or almost $10 million a day to house these immigrants, putting them up in hotels, which are forcing New Yorkers to not get revenue that might come from people visiting, the tremendous cost. Now, Eric Adams is headed down south of the border to tell people, please do not come. It is a political nightmare for them.
this is good news in terms of the wall that started during the Trump administration is going to continue on. But what assurances do we have that this is not just something to pacify the current political wave that is moving against them, and it will in fact be followed through? I think we're looking at about 24 miles of wall that's with this contract that's being let out. So are you convinced that this is a true change of heart, or is it just political?
I believe that it comes from an abject failure, and this is in Stark County, which is on our border. Stark County is home to tens of thousands of people who migrate through this every single month. It is placing law enforcement in difficult circumstances. It is placing local people in the cities, Eagle Pass and other places, in a very difficult position, not only from the threat to their families, but national security. So the bottom line is, Tony, they are catching flack for what they've done. And one would have to ask in the first place, what were you trying to accomplish? What was your goal? How are you going to handle all these people? And once again, the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, ready, fire, aim.
Yeah. I was looking at it's actually 20 miles that they're going to be building here that they announced. But this comes after, I think they've sold off more than $300 million of materials for the wall for just $2 million. I mean, again, this makes absolutely no sense what this administration is doing.
Well, it goes back to that original plan that was all about politics to match their political ambitions of completely turning this country into a one-party system. But what it's done is destabilize these states and cities that allow illegal immigrants to flourish there. And this is the typical thing that put an inch and then take a mile. This is untenable for America. And these images are harming their opportunity every single time, just like rule of law. They have massive problems as a result of what they instilled and created. And this is placing federal law enforcement in a bad position. But they did this. We did not negotiate this.
Right. And the polling and the trends suggest that the issues you brought up, lawlessness, the crime, border, and the economy, are going to be major issues in the 2024 election. And frankly, the administration and the Democratic Party have very little to stand on when it comes to those three issues.
Well, the American people have heard the story. They understand it. They are looking for my party. I am a Republican. They're looking for our party, and I am too, to take a strong stand now that we are in budget negotiations for appropriations for 24, to be able to stand on solid ground and say, we are not going to fund the government if they do not fix these problems. So they preempted that. They're starting to do this. It's just in one area, but next to Arizona is probably the biggest gap that we have in the border.
Congressman Pete Sessions, I want to thank you for taking time to join us today. Always great to see you. Thanks so much, and have a great afternoon.
Tony, thank you very much.
You can find out more about Pete Sessions and the ongoing crisis at the border when you visit TonyPerkins.com. It's TonyPerkins.com.
Look, son, Christians must be aware of the issues that threaten the culture and the church. Family Research Council's David Clausen, along with co-authors Denny Burke and Colin Smothers, released a new book titled Male and Female He Created Them, a study on gender, sexuality, and marriage. It was written to help Christians understand what Scripture teaches and how to address them biblically. Order your copy of this book at HeCreatedThem.org.
Welcome back to the weekend edition of Washington Watch. I'm David Salkeld. On Tuesday of this week, Family Research Council President Tony Perkins had the chance to chat with our very own Dr. Jennifer Bowens about the movement to prevent minors from getting gender mutilation surgeries, as well as a new publication from Family Research Council that exposes the myths of the gender movement. That interview got started.
Dr. Bowens, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It's good to be back, Tony.
So tell us about this new publication and why it is so necessary at this time.
Yeah, so this resource is intended to be kind of for policymakers, first of all, because a lot of the testimonies that we've given at the state level or even up on the Hill have been, the questions have that we've answered have been about these issues. So we put this together because we just kept hearing these questions over and over, and these are the issues that scaffold the trans issue, and the research that's used to come alongside and push these very invasive physiological interventions. So this is a great resource because it includes a lot of citations, a lot of the research that has been used to promote these procedures. So it's all in one place. Pretty much every question that's been asked on this issue is included in this packet here.
So who is this targeted toward in terms of who benefits most from having access to this publication?
So really, we wrote this with the intention that this would be used for policymakers, but it's so user-friendly that it is really for anyone who has questions, or, you know, maybe you're a parent or a grandparent and you have a child that you care about who's come home from school and they're giving some of the same lines that we often hear, that, you know, if I don't transition, I'm going to commit suicide. Or, you know, what are some of the root issues that go along with someone who claims to be transgender? So we talk about the social contagion factor. And then we also talk about some of the things that maybe if you've been following this issue, some of the arguments or the logic that hasn't been presented in some of the public forums. For example, I speak a little bit about the DSM, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And I look at the gender dysphoria diagnosis and compare it to other diagnoses that are listed in the DSM that would be for children, and how we approach a diagnosis for children, and how gender dysphoria is different. And these aren't necessarily hard factual things, but just things to say, you know, hey, there's a little bit of a difference in how we approach gender dysphoria, and why is that the case? So it's a thought-provoking document, as well as providing some real counters to the arguments that have been proposed in the psychological and medical fields.
So let me ask you about that, Dr. Bowens. Give me two ways in which gender dysphoria is treated differently than some other disorder.
Yeah, so there's a class of disorders in the DSM that specifically are given when a person has a long pattern of behavior or thought. And typically when we're working with a child, we don't want to diagnose them until they're 18. And why is that? Well, we know that the child is still developing and they're still changing. And so you want to wait until their brain and their development has reached a certain marker. And so when they've reached that marker, then we kind of go back and say, let's look at this, and maybe they do in fact have this disorder. But what you have with gender dysphoria is somebody receiving a diagnosis within 6 months, before they're 18, before they've completed development. And then when you compare these types of diagnoses and the interventions attached to them, what you find is that gender dysphoria has a far more invasive, and actually more invasive than any other diagnosis in the DSM. So not only are we diagnosing early with something that would be considered a lifelong enduring pattern, but we're also attaching interventions that are really dangerous and life-altering while a person's still a child.
So when you're talking about these invasive, we're talking about surgeries and irreversible treatments?
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about making alterations to one's physiology that are irreparable, and certainly we don't even know the psychological ramifications of these interventions.
And
that hasn't been studied.
You touched on this. One of the reasons that we wait until a child reaches adulthood into a certain age is because well into adulthood, the brain is continuing to develop. So for a adolescent to be able to make a decision that is going to have effects upon their life for the rest of their life, that's not something that we've historically allowed in this country.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we don't give diagnoses that are in the DSM that are heavier diagnoses that indicate someone has a lifelong pattern until they're 18. So then it's out of character, so to speak, to give a child such a heavy diagnosis that says this is how you'll always identify.
Is a 2 or 3 year phase, is that a lifelong pattern?
Not when you're a child.
Right.
I mean, think about how many of us, I myself thought I'd be an astronaut for several years. But I was influenced greatly by Star Wars. Now, I'm not an astronaut.
I thought I'd be a radio talk show host when I was a kid. Look what happened.
Look what happened. So some patterns are enduring. But it's better to wait until a person reaches adulthood to make those lifelong decisions.
So we see the differences there. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Why? Why do we treat this different than any other condition?
Well, I think there are many factors, but I think for our purposes today, one that's worth noting is the political factor. And even trans advocates, I'll get that out, they actually can get upset with the U.S. and our use of gender dysphoria in the DSM, because a lot of activists believe that this is a civil rights issue and that it shouldn't be treated as a clinical issue. But they will say, especially those from other countries, will make comments that America has to for insurance purposes. So, what you see in the activist space is a lot of times using the DSM for purposes, the end goal of transitioning or imposing these medical interventions on children when it's convenient. And that's not to say that there isn't a real issue that some kids suffer, but to divorce this idea from politics would be equally wrong and not paid.
Questions, Dr. Ballinger? Evidence that
That's right. That's the purpose of this document.
All right. And where can folks get a copy besides TonyPerkins.com?
At frc.org. It's on the main homepage.
All right. Once again, great work, Dr. Bowens. Always great to have you on the program, and glad you're at the Family Research Council.
Me too.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I'm David Salkeld, thanking you for being with us. I look forward to having you back here again next week for the weekend edition of Washington Watch with Tony Perkins.
Washington Watch Weekend Edition is powered by the Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, Visit TonyPerkins.com. There's no denying media plays a huge role in our society today, and it's just getting bigger. From the big screen to the small screen to the phone screen, movies, documentaries, and animated features are everywhere. And we can't forget audio, music, podcasts. Where does it end? American Family Studios was started to turn society's obsession with media into a ministry opportunity. After all, what better way to advance the Christian worldview than to use movies, TV shows, and audio to get the message across? Quality is of the utmost importance, so we've outfitted our post-production facility with the equipment and space to fill a wide range of needs, including a studio that can accommodate a live audience. The state-of-the-art facility has been utilized to create God Speaks, Son of Snow, I Am Potential, and Ryan Dufresne's Secret Agent. And that's just scratching the surface. Stay up to date on what's coming next and get to know us better at AmericanFamilyStudios.net.
You should never really have to be tormented by the fear of death. There are only two ways you can ever face the future, no matter what it is. You can face the future by faith, or you can face the future in fear. And if you know the Word of God, you will not have to be afraid.
Dr. David Jeremiah continues his series, The Great Disappearance, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio. This is the Middle East Report Special Edition. I'm John Riley. Thank you for listening. The Middle East, that's one part of the world that we need to pay attention to, especially the country of Israel. And each week, try to help you make sense of what's happening in that region through a biblical lens. Security threats, archaeological discoveries, biblical prophecy, those are just some of the things that we cover. And the main purpose of the Middle East Report Special Edition is to encourage you to read, study, and apply the Word of God in your life. And I believe that the best way to do that is to connect to the people, places, geography, culture of what we read in the Word of God. And hopefully we're helping you to do that every single week here on the Middle East Report Special Edition. Well, fasten your seatbelts. We have got an incredible program today. And I'll tell you, I love this guy. I love what he does. He speaks all over the nation. And I'm talking about Pastor Barry Stagner. And Pastor Barry and his wife, they live in California. They've been married since 1977. He is the founding and senior pastor of Calvary Central. He's also the host of the internationally broadcast weekly program, The Lineup. He's got a lot of books out there, including Time of the Signs, and they speak at conferences and retreats. They address, topics of marriage and ministry and prophecy. We're going to be talking a lot about prophecy today, by the way. They've got 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and Pastor Barry, it is so good to have you with us today on the Middle East Report Special Edition.
Thank you, John. It's a privilege to be on with you.
Well, Pastor Barry, you have been pastoring for a long, long time. Tell us about your church there in California.
Well, we had started actually, like most Calvaries do, we started as a home Bible study. I go back at my associate, my right-hand guy, and I laugh because I can never remember if we started on March 17th with 19 people or March 19th with 17 people. It's one of those two. Back in 1999, and the church just took off, and God has blessed us. And I came out of a church that had a heavy focus on evangelism, and so we just stayed faithful to the teaching of the Word, and God has added to the church throughout those years. And we've had a couple of moves. One most recent a couple of years ago, where we moved from the city of Tustin, where for 22 years we were known as Calvary Chapel Tustin, and now having moved to the city of Costa Mesa, we changed our name to Calvary Central OC, and the rest, as they say, is history. God has opened a lot of doors for us as a church to do different ministry things around the world. Planted a church in South Africa, have been to various countries, both as a church and with Amir, and God is just so good.
Well, we're talking about, you mentioned Amir Sarfati. He is the founder of Behold Israel, and you two get together a lot and travel around the world. And most recently, you were doing these Revealing Revelation conferences. I guess it's like a one-day conference, and you just tell everybody, you know, how they can understand Revelation in one day. How in the world do you do that? That's crazy.
It is, and we both know it. Actually, I just got home from Dallas yesterday, and I'm headed out to Minneapolis on Wednesday, and then off to Delaware County, Philadelphia on Friday to do a couple of conferences this week. But, you know, Amir and Dr. Rick Young, wonderful brother in the Lord, got together and wrote a book, basically a commentary on Revelation. And what they've done is they've taken and condensed this down to two different conferences. One, most of the time we do 7 sessions. We'll do 2 on like a Friday night and then 5 on Saturday. But we've just, because of venue availability and things like that, we've also compressed it down to 5 sessions where we teach the whole book of Revelation in 5 sessions in one day. And we actually did that 2 days in a row. Friday, we had some 1,300 people at the Richmond Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. And then we had a repeat of that on Saturday. And just a tremendous time. But I think the main takeaway for both of us, the first time we ever did this was in the Philippines in January of this year. And we came away feeling like, you know, we really didn't leave anything out, and we touched on all the high points, and of course we couldn't deal with every specific detail, but I think the more we do this, the more we're able to just encapsulate and refine our teaching, you know, whether it's 7 sessions or 5, and we both, I think, feel pretty good about, you know, we didn't really just do a flyover. We covered a lot of details, but yeah, it's quite an undertaking for a single day. And I will say, at the end of each day, we're both very tired.
I would imagine. I mean, look, Barry, for me, just when I read the book of Revelation, I mean, it is awesome, but you're reading about beasts, and you're reading about people with wings and things with wings, and I don't know, all kinds of things I don't quite understand, you know, and it can get kind of confusing, for sure.
Well, that's part of the job, I think, to explain that there's imagery there that John is careful to identify. You know, when he says, you know, these creatures, one had a face like a man. He's not saying it had a man's face, but that's the best he could do to describe it. He's very careful, even as Revelation opens up with Jesus saying, these things were sent and signified through my angel. And what those two terms mean is to show by signs and symbols. So he announces right away that there's going to be symbolic imagery. And, you know, if we're just careful to make sure that we understand that the imagery has a literal meaning and not, you know, approach it from the allegorical standpoint, but recognize that John, for one, John is incorporating inspired language by the Holy Spirit that would be timeless. You know, if he said, you know, there was, I heard a voice like the sound of a jet engine. I mean, who's going to understand that for century after century until the jet engine comes to a reality? But he used, you know, he had a voice like the sound of many waters. That's a timeless description that anybody could relate to. So, but it's full of imagery, but, you know, a careful and cautious approach will help us come to an understanding of what's written.
I love that, and I hope that more and more churches will begin to, you know, teach on last days and prophecy. And, you know, Pastor Barry, I have no idea why churches don't. You know, do you have any insight into that? I mean, why don't churches teach on this?
Well, you know, that's the most common comment we hear, no matter where we're at in the world. 2 things we hear consistently: I can't find a Bible teaching church, and secondly, no one's teaching Bible prophecy. And I was actually speaking at a conference here in Southern California 2 weeks ago, and the question was asked in the Q&A session, and the pastor answered, much to my surprise and delight, what I always answer, because it's hard. It's a hard book to teach, but we have to understand, so is Isaiah, so is Ezekiel, so is Daniel, so is Matthew. So, I mean, it takes study. You have to put in the time, and even more so to pull out the over 500 Old Testament references in the book of Revelation. So it's not just a casual, here I'll throw out this little sermonette and people be on their way and have learned something. But I think, it really takes a lot of time and investment. And, John, there's people today who don't want to hear about this kind of stuff. And this follows, in what Paul said about the last days in 2 Timothy 4, that, there's coming a time where people don't want to put up with sound doctrine. But they'll heap up for themselves teachers because they have itching ears and turn away from the truth and turn aside to fables. And, that's part of what we're experiencing today. The deep stuff, the heavy stuff, the hard stuff. People want to come to church and get a break from life because the deep stuff, the hard stuff, the heavy stuff goes on 24/7, 365. So, but we can't shy away from this, especially now, because we are living in the time of the signs. I mean, once Israel was reborn as a nation, the prophetic clock began to advance, and it's moving faster and faster the closer we get to that moment and twinkling of an eye that we're all waiting for.
That's amazing, and we do have to study the Word of God, and it's so important that we do that every single day. Well, we want to turn to some of the current events that are happening right now. We've got about 5 minutes before our first break, but I wanted to ask you something that's in the news a lot right now is this potential deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And everybody's talking about this. Israel is talking about this. The United States is talking about this. And it seems like a lot of Muslim nations are making peace with Israel. How do you see this fitting into the end times? It concerns me because, in the past, Muslims were not, at least a lot of nations were not very friendly, toward Israel. And a lot of these deals require Israel to kind of give up a lot of stuff. So how do you see this, and then the nuclear thing that the United States may approve for Saudi Arabia? How do you see this in the end times, or how do you see things playing out with this?
I think with Saudi Arabia especially, Bahrain's made movements in that direction in other countries, but Saudi Arabia represents Sheba and Dedan in the Ezekiel war scenario, and they're going to be the one protesting voice. The Arab Gulf states will protest the invasion from the north of the 5 invading nations named in Ezekiel 38, and so for them to be making overtures in this direction has heavy prophetic implications. But I think too we have to recognize that part of this with moving toward this agreement with Israel is the Saudis know that Israel is the most powerful country in the region. Their military is legendary all over the world. Their IAF, the Israeli Air Force in particular, their pilots are U.S. and well-trained. And, I think everybody recognizes they're a formidable force. And so, a portion of this points back to the ancient Shia-Sunni struggle, where these two factions of Islam have long been warring. And it's a shared animosity for Iran that is at least in part a motivating factor for the Saudis to make sure they're in good standing with the nation of Israel. Now, within the agreement, they made no bones about it that one of the requirements is a Palestinian state. So they are Muslim at heart, and they do want to see the two-state solution at least on the table. But I think, Mohammed bin Salman is an interesting character. And him and his, the line, this linear city of some 500 miles and encompassing borders of 3 countries, he's a bit outside the box for the Saud family, and he thinks of it differently. So he is curious as to how he operates and thinks in Western ways, but then we'll speak, the typical Saudi type of language and supportive of the Palestinian state and all that. But I think with him in particular, I think there's a bit of politicking going on here with even the language about the Palestinian state, because there's been other comments made, that the Palestinians from Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman, that they need to get their act together. And, because they recognize that they initiate the vast majority of the struggles that make the news, with Israel and, the borders, the Bethlehem or whatever it may be going on at the time. But I think the prophetic component is the Ezekiel 38 and 39 involvement of the Arab Gulf states in protesting Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, and Sudan's invasion of Israel.
We're talking to Barry Stagner. He's the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel OCT in Tustin. And if you want to connect with Barry, find out more about what he is doing worldwide and there in that area, he speaks all over the country and around the world. You can connect with them when you go to ccttustin.org. That's cctustin.org. We are going to continue to talk about prophecy, things happening in the news, and a whole lot more here on the Middle East Report Special Edition. I just want to remind you, please download a podcast of the show. Go to afr.net, click on the podcast tab. You can do that. Look for the Middle East Report. Also, you can get this wherever